Hi, I'm Bree, and this is my sister Jules. I'm an English teacher.
And I'm already out of intro ideas.
Together, we drink wine as we unpack the brilliant writing of the hit 90s sitcom, Boy Meets World. Cheers!
Cheers!
All right, what are we drinking today?
Today we are drinking a Casillero del Diablo, a Merlot from Chile that retails for about $10 on average. You could probably find it at most grocery stores or any store that sells wine.
Except you had to DoorDash it because you couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, you know what? I went to a Kroger and a Publix, couldn't find it. So I'm full of lies.
So you cannot. This was a wine that we chose because we thought it was one of those wines that you could find anywhere. Because I'm in Brooklyn. I don't know if we've established this. I think we have. I'm in Brooklyn. Jules is in Nashville. This wine is everywhere here in New York. There's a kind of a picture of a devil on the, what would you call that? Sommeliers would definitely know the name for like where the bottle starts to like fan out from the shaft.
Mm-hmm. Please don't say that again.
Words you cannot say in a classroom setting.
It kind of looks like a, what do you call the, when you stamp an envelope with candle wax?
Insignia stamps.
Yes, that's what
There's
that
definitely
is.
a name for it that I don't know.
According to the website, on the nose, the wine shows delicious hints of plums and herbs. This Merlot reveals hints of chocolate and spice while integrating perfectly with the toasted American oak. I'm definitely getting the toasted oak.
I think it's a fantastic, I use that word a lot. I think it's a great table red. So weird thing about doing a podcast is you listen to your own voice all the time and you're just like, wow, I'm really annoying.
And then you're desperately trying to use different words.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think you were going to say this is a great budget wine.
$10?
It's great for if you need a wine on a Tuesday night and you had a hard day.
You've got a friend coming up and you're like, no, you're just alone.
No, you're just alone and you're kind of sad. It's been a hard day and you're just like, let me just pop open this $10 bottle of wine and make myself feel good. Is that so bad?
No, it's not. Okay, let's get into the episode. So the title is Teacher's Bet. Teacher's pet. That's what.
Oh.
Synopsis is Feeney makes a bet with Corey to teach his class for a week. If more students pass, Corey wins. And if more students fail, Feeney wins. This aired November 19th, 1993. It was written by April Kelly. Also an executive producer, by the way, or a co-producer. And I kind of feel bad that I haven't been mentioning that. So I was like, ooh, I'm so glad that they had a female writer on the first episode. She's one of the producers. So also great that we have a female co-producer. I don't really love that it's she's a producer. Just call her a producer. I have to call her co-producer. The main producer is the man. And then we got, anyway. Directed by David Trainer, who has been directing all of these episodes, except the first one. Viewers, 21.2 million. Fantastic numbers, as always. Yeah, amazing. Guest stars, Danielle Fishel as Topanga, Lindsay Price also as Linda, who I freaking loved, by the way.
I looked her up, too, because I was like, what else has she been in? Because she's amazing. She's also so beautiful.
Freaking gorgeous.
I was starry-eyed watching her on screen.
First impressions.
This episode was very deep and intense and difficult at times.
We actually started to record this episode weeks ago, and I was actually in Nashville visiting Jules, and we were going to do it in the same room at the same time, which we usually don't do. But I got kind of nervous, actually, about recording this because I felt like I just needed to do more research. Any episode that, kind of attempts to take on prejudice and racism, it's heavy, it's packed, especially today. So I just wanted to make sure that we handled this with deference for, the topic. And I didn't want to kind of wing it this time. I wanted to make sure that we knew what the heck we were talking about. And that's not to say that I do know what the heck I'm talking about now, but just, anyway.
We're better armed for the conversation.
Exactly. So we start off in the cafeteria and Sean says, hey, Corey, brought you a great article on Barry Bonds. So Corey says, the $43 million man. And Minkus comes over and he says, why do they call him that? And Sean says, because that's what he's getting paid to play baseball for 6 years. And Minkus immediately shoots back, $7.16 million a year? And Sean was like, if that's what it comes out to, yeah. And Corey's like, look, he happens to be one of the top guys in baseball. And Minkus says, well, I happen to think Mr. Feeney is one of the top guys in teaching, and he makes about $40,000 a year, which A, teacher's pet, B, thank you for acknowledging that teachers should get paid more. And it's really sad that it's freaking 2024 and we're still there. There are teachers that are still getting paid like $40,000 a year.
I was going to
With
say,
inflation,
like, the average
water guns are $200 now.
Yeah. No, but yes. No, absolutely. The fact that it was 1993 and he said $40,000 and that's what teachers are still making.
Yeah.
That is criminal.
I'm jumping ahead right now. The button on this episode was the cheerleading scene. And I was like, why are they doing this? So basically, it was really quick. Like, Amy shows Eric her old cheerleading routine, which is like very dated. It's like Bobo Ski Rotten Totten. And like, Eric goes like, Mom, that's so dated. And then he has Linda, his new girlfriend, come in and she just made the cheerleading squad. And they're like, what did you learn? And she's like, oh, our new cheer. And she does the exact same cheer. It's like Bobo Ski Rotten Totten. And I was like, well, that was kind of silly. And then I was like, no. They're making the point that nothing changes.
Oh my God. You're so right. I did not pick that up on that. That is genius. Yes.
I know everything about the show needs to be unpacked.
It's almost as if somebody should do a podcast about it.
Sean says, that stinks to Feeney getting paid $40,000 a year. And Minkus is like, finally, something we agree on. And Sean's like, Feeney ain't worth that kind of money. And Minkus is like, you thought I meant he was overpaid? I meant that Mr. Feeney is grossly and tragically underpaid. Corey does his like classic Corey thing where he's like, Minkus. Can I call you Minkus? Does spelling ever change? No. Does history ever change? Does Feeney ever change? Never. Know why? He doesn't have to. Because nothing about teaching 6th grade ever changes.
I think this show does a great job of portraying a valid perspective from like a 6th grader. That is something that a 6th grader would think at like surface level. Somebody who like does not paying attention in school, is like bored every day, is like, all of this is in a textbook and the teacher's just telling us these things. Like the teacher doesn't do anything but just tell us what's in the book. I can just read the book. Obviously, yes, there's a lesson learned at the end that's not true, but it's fascinating to me.
I really think that the people who wrote this must have had teaching experience. And I mean, I was a student once. I felt that way too. I was like, what exactly does the teacher do? Like, they just kind of tell us to do things and then we do it. And then they just like evaluate if we did it well enough. That seems like an easy thing to do. What I learned quickly is that teaching means that you have to be a master of the material. And the mistake that a lot of new teachers make is like, they do all of the learning themselves and then they like feed the kids the nuggets of knowledge that they themselves worked very hard to gather from their studies. And they don't give the kids the chance to struggle through the material and find the nuggets themselves. And that is when true learning happens. So the most successful lessons I've ever done have been when I have given students the task of teaching someone else the material, because that's when you really need to know it. Feeney does a very good teacher move in this, but also like spelling never changes, not necessarily true. History never changes, not true. Like, we're changing the narrative. We're trying to unwhitewash history. We're trying to teach, different perspectives on, right? Like the textbook, teaching the same textbook is a huge issue, actually, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
context
good teachers,
is everything, and perspective of those textbooks. And yeah. Wow.
Right.
Great point.
And in our second episode, we talked about the books that we read and how our English teachers, when we were in high school, were moving away from the canon. And we were learning a lot of modern contemporary literature. That's something that good teachers do. They keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the field, and they change their curriculum to, accommodate the changing tides of our social climate, in my opinion. Great teachers go to professional development events and learn and keep up with it. So anyway.
It's no different than any other industry that people work in, right? Like technology changes.
Exactly.
My job is always changing. Everybody's job always changes. Nothing ever remains the same. There's always something to learn.
You're constantly learning how new generations are perceiving their world and trying to meet them where they are. Of course, you want to teach them about what's happened in the past, but you're always bringing it into what's going on now. You're always connecting it to current events. So Minka says, I think you're wrong. And Corey says, well, I think I'm right. Then we're in the classroom. Feeney says, this week in social studies, we will be talking about prejudice. And Corey immediately makes a joke. Good, because I'm prejudiced against the scungy food in the cafeteria. Great word, scungy. Feeney says, we will be talking about Black slaves in the American South and Jews in Nazi Germany, and several examples of prejudice throughout history. I was like, are we going to do an episode on Black slaves in the American South? Because that was the first thing he said. Having that one Black actor kind of be like Jim from Tom Sawyer. I was like, oh, this would be a good thing, I think, for them to do, is to unpack Black slavery in the American South. And then it's quickly clarified that we are going to learn about the Jews in Nazi Germany. They're going to read Anne Frank. I was a little disappointed, I'm not going to lie, because of course, it's not the oppression Olympics here. Like, of course, learning about the Jews in Nazi Germany is extremely important and must be done. For a show that has to choose one thing to focus on in an episode about prejudice that takes place in America, I wished that they had focused on the Black experience, because they're focusing on an experience in a different country. And I do think that they need to spend a lot of time on focusing on our country, because the experience of Black slavery in our past still has effects that we see today, right? So we need to understand, what the Black experience in America is now because of our history. And of course, he, threw a line out there, we're going to learn about that, and we're just meant to assume, okay, they're going to learn about it. But we only could choose one, and they chose, let's focus on another country. We're going to do the sort of quote unquote easy thing. And I say that, like, I understand that it's not easy to talk about the Holocaust. Not at all. I just mean it's easier for the writers to focus on an experience in a separate country than to focus on the American experience. I read The Diary of Anne Frank because I was going to read it in one of my classes, and I ended up not wanting to teach it because I don't think that it really captures the experience of a lot of Jewish people during the Holocaust. It's just her experience was unique because she was wealthy and she had a hiding space. And it really is more of a look into like child psychology and adolescent psychology. It's a different type of primary source that doesn't really reveal much about the Holocaust.
I remember in 6th grade, I did not read The Diary of Anne Frank, but I did read a different book. It was a nonfiction about this young girl who did die in the Holocaust, and it was very detailed, and it really shed a light on what happened. But I found a lot of value in reading that. It was very eye-opening.
Right now, the one that most high schoolers read is Night by Elie Wiesel, and it is, it goes into more detail. Okay, so Corey had made his little joke, so at the end of class, the bell rings, and Feeney goes, Mr. Matthews, and Corey's like, I'm gonna read it, don't worry, like, I'll do my homework, really, and Feeney's like, you are making my job very difficult. Corey says, well, we both know it's not very hard to teach 6th grade. Bruh, triggered. So I always thought you secretly like that I make it more challenging. Same step every year. The only thing is that the students change. And Feeney goes, oh, you think my job is easy. So Feeney proposes this idea that they make a bet. They're going to switch roles. Feeney's going to be a student and Corey is going to be the teacher. Friday, there's going to be a test. It's the test that Feeney wrote. If more students pass than usual, then Corey wins. And if more students fail than usual, then Feeney wins. And Corey puts his bike up and Feeney offers 1/5 of his weekly paycheck if he wins. Which, by the way, I did do the math. And before taxes, it would be $153.83, which is a lot of money for Corey. After taxes, assuming you take out about a third, $103.08.
Not for a teacher, though, but for a student who's...
Oh, yeah. No, exactly. I had a particularly difficult 7th grade class a few years back. One of them was just like sitting there and like cutting paper into like strips that were just like falling on the floor. Just like, it was just like absolute kindergarten chaos in this 7th grade classroom. So I put down my expo marker and I'm like, and the one who was giving me the most difficult, the Corey of the room, I call on the Corey and I'm like, I give them the expo marker and I'm like, you know what we're doing. Like, I know that you know that we're going around and we're doing, here are the answers, okay? I want you to facilitate this now. Like it's easy. You can do this. So they get all excited. They're like, yes, woo, I'm the teacher. And I go and sit in their seat, and they happen to be the one that was cutting the paper into strips. And I took their scissors and I took their paper and I start cutting things into strips. And I just like, I start acting like they were acting. And it was kind of like, this whole thing could have been on TV because it was actually kind of ridiculous how it worked, which you would think in real life it'd be like, oh, that really won't, it worked. Like the kid was like, oh my God, this is so hard. And I was like, yeah. I was like, this is, now you understand what I'm trying to do. Like, I'm just trying to do something here and you're making it really hard. It's very important to put students in the position of the teacher sometimes. And that's why I believe in presentations, giving students the task of teaching other students things, putting them in charge of things. They can do it. They can do it. They just need to be prepared for it, and they need to have the, access to everything that teachers have access to. But anyway.
Do you think the hardest part about teaching is keeping them engaged?
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. Like, I really do believe that you have to know them really well. And so you have to strike a balance between learning them and giving them a chance to show you who they are, which can feel a little scary because you kind of open things up a little bit for a minute and then they fill that empty space with them. And then you gather information and you're like, okay, this is what matters to them. This is what they want to talk about. This is what is on their minds. This is what they're, sifting through in their own process of making sense of their world. And then you have to be kind of a well of knowledge and know, okay, so there's this book and there's this thing and, there's this podcast and there, and so I'm constantly out in the world looking for things to bring into my classroom. And you have to just want to do that, And
I wonder, do you think that it might get harder as you get older and they stay the same age, or maybe it might be a little harder, but it also might be easier because you're coming into the classroom every year with more stuff to teach.
It gets easier and harder. It's both. It gets easier in that I have more in my arsenal, right? Like I can say, oh yeah, I taught that thing a while back. Let me bring that back in. That'd be perfect for this. Like I just, that well of knowledge gets deeper, but also it gets harder because the age gap between me and them keeps getting bigger and bigger. Okay, so we switch over to the living room. Morgan and Mom are playing cards on the couch. Enter Eric and Linda. We meet Linda, and it's established that Linda's great. She's very good with Morgan. Corey rushes in with Alan. Corey tells his mom and dad about the bet that he made with Feeney. And Alan gets very nervous about the bike because the bike was expensive and he doesn't want Corey to lose the bike. Then we're in the classroom. Corey is in charge. So it's the first time that Corey is the teacher. He writes his name on the board, which is, hey, dude.
There was something really funny about him underlining that before putting the line on the E. I don't know why that was funny, but it was.
I literally wrote, I like the way he wrote it. LOL, was that choreographed? Okay, so Corey says, you know the rule, no baseball caps in class? History. Topanga decides to then appropriate every culture. She's like, well, if we're going to eliminate the cap rule, can we also discard the dress code entirely? And Corey's like, you're not going to show up naked or anything, are you? And she's like, no, although I find nothing shameful about nudity. I was thinking of wearing garments from cultures more in tune with the goddess. A sari, perhaps, or a pareo. I had to look up what a pareo was. It is a sarong that like Polynesian folks would wear. I was like, you know what? That probably wouldn't be against the dress code, though. And if it is, that's an issue. We need to talk about that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, wait. Yeah,
Right?
we I did not even pick up on that. You're so right. That's super problematic if that's not allowed.
Dress code, we could do a whole separate podcast episode on dress code. I want to focus on prejudice for this one, but I do have a lot to say about dress code. I am personally into uniforms. That is my thing. I am on the more conservative side when it comes to dress for young adolescents. People don't expect that from me because I am queer, and people just like assume a lot of things about you when you're from Brooklyn and you have like a certain, I don't know. I feel like I'm not conservative in most ways, but like with this, for some reason I am. Let's do a little, we might cut this, but like brief conversation about dress code. What do you think about it?
I am on the fence. I do see the benefits of uniforms, and I totally understand your perspective, but I also really believe in expression, self-expression. So maybe I'm on the side of a loose dress code. So uniforms, but you can wear your hair however you want you can play with the uniform a little bit.
I think that everyone should have options. I think the uniform should be like a store of different types of clothes, just like very comfortable, easy. I see it as a positive thing. I see it as a gift. I see it as like, here, you don't have to worry anymore. I have students who I know for a fact have been late for school because they've been so concerned about what they're going to wear because someone said something about what they wore the day before, like just relax and just like know that everyone at the school is just in the same stuff so that we don't think about that and we don't care about that. So Corey's like, yeah, Topanga, fine, as long as you're covered up. Minkus says, people, are we going to do our social studies work today? And Corey ends up giving everyone a second chance to do the homework, which I thought was kind of sweet. I'm going to give all the kids like me a second chance to do their homework, which of course pisses Minkus off because he's like, I did my homework, so like what about me?
He should be grateful he has a night off.
So Minkus' homework is to get a life. Then we're in the kitchen. Eric comes back from Linda's with a genuine Japanese lantern from Tokyo for Morgan. And Corey enters. And he's like, I'm the greatest teacher in the history of the universe. By the end of the day, it was one big class party. And he gets into a conversation with his dad about it. And Alan's like kind of getting nervous. And he's like, okay, so like, did you teach them anything? Like, when did you actually teach the lesson? And Corey's like, I told you, Dad, the teacher doesn't really do anything. You read the book, you pass the test. And Alan's like, did you read the book? And Corey's like, I skimmed it. And Alan's like, well, what was it about? And Corey says, it was about the Nazis and Jews a long time ago when there was prejudice and stuff. And Alan is great. He goes, a long time ago. And Corey's like, yeah, this stuff is history, Dad. Alan suddenly gets very worried about the bike.
I kind of assumed that the dad was going to dig into it a little bit more and be like, yeah, maybe that's not quite true. But right. I also can understand that. I feel like Alan understands that that is Mr. Feeney's lesson. He's like, I'm going to let the teacher do what he does best and teach Corey this lesson.
Thinking that prejudice doesn't happen anymore or that we've fixed racism because of the civil rights movement is kind of like the issue that I think a lot of educators are trying to combat against right now. And I think that in teachers trying to combat against that wrong assumption that everything is fine now, that we're like a post-racism country, they are getting a lot of pushback because CRT is this like buzzword right now, right? What I want people to know about CRT is that it's not something that is explicitly taught to like K through 12 students. It's a complicated theory. It is on the same level as like feminism, right? Like you don't really teach feminism. You take a feminist stance on things. You read books through a feminist lens, right?
And or that you change the context by which you teach the history. Isn't that what it really is? The perspective, the context.
Yes, you adjust from whose perspective you present the information, taking into account the understanding that race has played a role in how our country has been built and set up. Best example I can give.
I mean, just the fact that slavery has been around for longer, like for the history of America, slavery has existed for longer than not existed in America.
Which is insane. When slavery ended, there was the whole Reconstruction era. There was Jim Crow. In 1956, this is only 4 years before our parents were born, an Alabama law barred black and white people from playing cards, dominoes, checkers, pool, football, baseball, basketball, or golf together. A North Carolina law required factories and plants to maintain separate bathrooms for black employees. A Louisiana law mandated that movie theaters and all places of public entertainment separate black and white patrons. This is in 1956. It's less than 100 years ago. That's not that long ago that written into policy, into law, was the separation of black and white people, which is like beyond ridiculous because it just like completely eliminates the diaspora of multicultural. Like, where does like a Japanese person, is a Japanese person white?
And then my head flashes back to about 3 days ago, as of this taping, where I live in Nashville, where there was a white supremacist protest happening downtown, where white supremacists just marched down the streets of Nashville with Confederate flags, and it's horrendous. I mean, it's 2024 and this is happening.
Are you kidding? This just happened?
This just happened over the weekend.
What do they want? What are they marching for? What do they want to happen?
I don't have an answer to that question.
Yeah, no, I know. And I don't know if they do either. Like, I think if I were to talk to them, if I were to get all of them in my classroom and to sit them down and to start
And
the
Mr.
conversation
Feeney
of
them?
like, and Mr. Feeney them and be like, what exactly is it that you want? What is the end goal? What are we striving for? What are we working toward? So who do you consider to be white? Where do you draw the line? Who isn't white anymore? What does that mean? And let's all just 23andMe all y'all and figure out exactly where you came from because everybody came from Africa. But it's ignorance, right? Like, and then there's a part of me that just like sighs metaphysically, just like drops my shoulders, and I'm just like, they just don't know. They're honestly just like ignorant. And that's what upsets me is like, really, like their education failed them.
That's got to upset you as a teacher who you work so hard to teach kids to not be ignorant, and then the ignorance still exists. And I know it's like the people that are ignorant, it's not your fault because you're an amazing teacher, and nobody who has ever went in your classroom has been ignorant. But the ignorance exists. Shameless plug. My sister's the best. And
my God,
it's got to be really frustrating to know that teachers work so hard to teach people, and yet the ignorance still exists, and it probably always will.
That beautifully takes us into actually the end. So in the end, when the test is distributed and everyone takes it, there are still kids who fail. And Corey's like, oh man. And Feeney says, don't worry, no matter how good a teacher you are, there are just always going to be kids who struggle and who fail. And that like hit me so hard. And there was something kind of healing about hearing that from Feeney, because I do actually, he's a fictional character, but whoever's writing him must have teaching experience. And I'm like, yeah, it hurts. It comes back to this idea that I was talking about earlier in our podcast season, if you will, about how because you love the students so much, when they don't perform or care or they're not demonstrating that you're reaching them, it sucks because you're just like, but I'm trying so hard because I love you so much. So Corey gets a taste of that, and it's really disheartening, but you can't focus on them because there's always things going on, and there's always other reasons that they're just not checked in. And it's kind of narcissistic to honestly expect all of them to give you their undivided attention all the time. It's like, relax,
it's
get over
unrealistic.
yourself. It's unrealistic. You put so much into it, and you kind of expect them all to be feeling those like incredible moments of epiphany and enlightenment that you're having with the kids that are invested and interested. And then there's just like the kids on the sides that are just like too tired, too hungry, dealing with other things.
Yeah.
But seriously, too hungry, like other things are going on, and they just, Anyway. So let's get back to Linda and what happens. We get the scene in the classroom where Corey's like getting a little more flustered and worried about his bike. He's at the front of the room and he's teaching. Topanga's on a yoga mat that Corey calls a yogurt mat. Minka's on a bouncy ball. There's chaos. Topanga is appropriating every culture. Corey does roll call and she just like growls in return, which was actually a really good growl. She was like,
yeah. It was really good. I remember hearing the audience laughing. They were laughing so hard. They thought that was so funny.
So we're in the living room now. Corey is reading the book because he's preparing for teaching, because he's starting to feel the pressure of like, oh my God, I have to like teach them something, and I can't teach them anything if I don't know the book. This is it. This is why you make kids teach sometimes, because they learn. Corey, talks to his dad a little bit, and, he says like teaching's really hard. And Alan's like, well, maybe you should stop trying to be like their friend and you should try to be more authoritative. New teachers 101. That's what happens to every new teacher. They have to figure out that right balance between being chill, the cool teacher, and then being authoritative enough to have their respect.
Listener, you should know when we were children, we would play school. And Bria was, every time she was like, I want to be the teacher, and I would have to be the student. And she would actually give me homework. She would print out homework.
I didn't print it.
I was so young. Yeah, you did. I was so young.
God, that's
and I was
crazy.
like, oh my God, this is so fun. Like, I'm playing school, so I would do the homework.
It is fun.
Yeah, no.
I agree.
Yeah, she's very authoritative.
But it was fun. I was born to be a teacher, 100%. Just the fact that I would play
100%.
it as a kid is kind of sad.
It's I admire that that's like the path that has been chosen for you. You've always known. I love that that is a thing. I've never had that thing. That's amazing.
You always played guitar, and I know that musicianship isn't your main thing, like your moneymaker, but I admire that that is something that you took up and taught yourself how to do. And I actually think it's great that it's not your job, because it's not becoming something that you hate. Because I think that once it becomes your moneymaker, it starts to become something that you don't enjoy as much anymore. It becomes drudgery. So we admire each other, okay?
This is a love fest. I love it. This wine is good. I like it. Thank you, Casillero del Diablo. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you for healing us. Okay, so Alan, after this conversation with his dad, Linda and Eric walk in, and Linda is sobbing. And the way she was crying, just as an actress, I felt it. I was like, oh my
yes,
God.
I noticed it the second time I watched it. I was like, oh, she's really crying. She really got herself ready for this, which is important to
totally
really be in
She
it.
did the work. She was in her trailer, like cutting onions. She was just kidding. She was probably like unpacking, like visiting some deep-rooted trauma. Corey's like, oh my God. Like, Morgan and Corey are like, wait, what? What's happening? And, Eric says some jerk at the mall called her a bad name, which, did you have an idea of what that name was?
No. I mean,
okay.
I'm not going to be
we get into
saying slurs. But I guess, you know what? It doesn't matter, because we know that she is Japanese just based on what we learned throughout the episode. So that as you will.
I loved Corey's acting in this scene, because he was like, in our mall here? Like, he was like, wait, how could this possibly happen? He was genuinely
ready to fight someone. And I was like, yeah, Corey, you fight him.
I know. But I loved that he played that like innocent kid being hit with the cold hard truth that prejudice exists today, and he did it well, and he gave it the performance it needed. Like he needed to show the shock, the true childhood,
the weight of it. Yeah, because he's been so blasé this whole episode that he doesn't really care. Like nothing, Mr. Feeney as a teacher, it doesn't really matter. Prejudice doesn't exist. Everything's fine. So it was important for him to really get it at this moment.
That is the coolest thing about the show, I think. It just like touches upon all the big explosive epiphanies of growing up, right? I think that's what growing up is like coming out of your blissful ignorance, sadly, and like moving into living with more awareness of your complicated and imperfect world that you live in. That can come with a lot of depression. It's not fun becoming an adolescent and learning that you live in a really effed up world. And that's why I read a lot of stories with my students that touch upon that, because I really do see that as the main thing that adolescents are going through. So we do like Flowers for Algernon, which is a fantastic way of exploring that. It's about a man who, in the beginning of the story, he is neurodivergent. He is mentally handicapped, and he becomes part of an experiment that increases his IQ in the story. And in becoming quote unquote smarter, he starts to become more paranoid and unhappy. And the big debate that we have is like, is it better to live in kind of ignorant bliss like he does at the beginning, or to have knowledge and understanding, but with it have the burdens of knowing all the harsh truths and realities of your world?
That was a short story that I read. I think I was in 6th or 7th grade when I read that one, and that one stuck with me.
We're back in the classroom, and Corey is in a suit. And I got a little fluttery when I saw him in the suit, because I was like, oh, he's taking it seriously. And he tried, and he read the book the night before, and he came in and he was
knows
all
that
ready.
he has to be authoritative. Yeah.
Yes.
And that like he cares, and he feels like he owes it to the grander picture, that he has to care, so he's gonna look like he cares, right? And it's also, it ties back to him not having a dress code. He's like, now I see why we have a dress code. We should care about how we present ourselves into the world.
Is the meaning of everything.
Back to episode 1. The way that I relate to that is like if you make a new friend or if you start a new relationship and your partner is talking about something that interests them that you've never really thought about or cared about until they started talking about it. And because you care about them, you care about what they're saying. And now you're so interested in it. And now you need to know everything about that thing because the person you care about cares about it. It's a really powerful feeling, care.
So Corey's suit is my fashion moment because it made me feel something. But my backup is Feeney's meatloaf sweatshirt. So Feeney enters with his meatloaf sweatshirt and Corey starts his speech. And he's like, class, I'd like to talk to you today about prejudice and how it still exists in today's world. I didn't even know that until last night when I saw a real smart, totally cool Asian girl crying her eyes out because some idiot at the mall called her a bad name. My lesson for today is that when people treat other people badly because of their skin color or their religion or where they come from, then real smart, totally cool people can really suffer. The only thing that I had about that was I was like, it doesn't really matter if they're smart or cool. Like, people suffer. But I get that he's trying to appeal to like sixth graders. I get that.
Yeah.
Like a part of me was like, oh, but like if she wasn't beautiful and if she wasn't like smart, like we should care regardless, you know? No one's paying attention. Corey just completely gives up and he goes to walk out of the classroom, but he stops and he turns and looks at Feeney. And Feeney just gives him this look that I think different people probably read differently. But it was a heavy look. It was grave. It was earnest. It was deep.
That look had a lot to it.
Yeah, it did.
There was a lot of sadness as if he felt like he was sad that Corey was giving up. But I think there was also a bit of hope that he would come out of it, if that makes sense. It was kind of hard to tell. There was a lot there.
Yeah, it was almost so blank, actually. I'm realizing now it was like very blank. And I almost wonder if it was like purposefully so blank that you could fill it in with whatever you wanted to fill it in with, which is kind of brilliant on the actor's part. So I filled it in with him looking at Corey going, you can leave, but don't you have more to say? So Corey comes back in and he says, hey, Sean, before your mother got married, what was her name again? And Sean says, Cordini. And Corey says, so that would make you, and am I going to say it?
I think you should say it only because, one, you're quoting the show. Two, I had to look this up because I have never heard this word before.
It comes from the word guapo, okay, which roughly means like dandy, swaggerer. I mean, that's in Spanish, that's handsome, right? But it has a little bit more of a pack meaning in Italian. It's a good thing, right? It has a positive connotation, but it also can mean like a worthless fellow. It refers to a type of flashy, boisterous, swaggering, dandy-like criminal in the Naples area. And the word transformed into the slur, which is the middle part of the word alone, following the arrival of poor Italian immigrants into the United States. So Southern Italian immigrant males would often refer to one another as guapo in a playful way. And then these Italian immigrants often worked as manual laborers in the US. And then Americans would call them, because the way that they would pronounce guapo was like guapo. So they would just call them the first part of the word, like in a derogatory way. Like, oh, that's that thing that y'all call each other, so we're going to call you that. And it started to become a slur from that. And while it's absolutely messed up, I have already come out as queer on this episode. So I always get like a little bit like, because I just, of course, slurs are wrong and bad and there's no arguing it. But like, the F slur for gays is like, it literally comes from the word for a pile of sticks used for kindling for a fire, because gays were burned as heretics the way witches were burned at the stake. And so it's literally equating a human being to a pile of sticks meant to be set on fire. And so like, when I look at how all of the slurs came to be what they are, and I'm just like, but we're not going to actually put much, like the F word should be on the level of the N word in my mind, because I'm just like, look at what it means. Look at what it actually means. I'm not saying this is the oppression Olympics. I want to be very clear. I understand that we should not say the N word. I'm not saying we should say any of these things. I'm just saying that, like, can we give the F word the reverence it deserves? Like, it is I messed up word. Anyway, that's all. Rant over. Sean gets angry, gets really mad. Good acting on Sean's part. This is the first time we actually see Ryder Strong like show his acting chops. He gets really mad at Corey. He gets up, he gets in his face. He's saying to Feeney, like, what are you going to do about it? Feeney says, he's the teacher. What is he going to do about it? And Sean's like, I'm going to knock his head off. And this is when Corey rises to the occasion and he becomes a teacher. And he says, what if you couldn't? What if you couldn't do anything about it? What if you lived in a country where I could kill you just because of your mom's last name? A 15-year-old girl is dead. Doesn't anybody care? She was real smart and totally cool. She wrote this book. They say she died of typhus, but they killed her because her name was Anne Frank. Anne Frank was a victim of anti-Semitism. Feeney corrects his pronunciation. Corey thanks him, and Corey says, you have to read this book, and you have to pass this test, not because of me, but because when someone calls someone else a bad name, it's not good that just one person jumps up. We all have to jump up. And then he reads from the book, in spite of everything, I still believe that people really are good at heart. I'm crying.
That was really, he did a really good job with that.
And I love the message. I think that I see that as the message, that when something happens, it's not okay that just one person says this is not okay. We all have to come together and say that this is not okay. And then I just love that it ends on the optimistic note that, you know, in spite of everything, I still believe that people are good at heart. That because I do believe that. I think people who, like the people that are marching in freaking Nashville, I see them as ignorant. I believe that if you sat them down, maybe it's naivete, but I do believe that if you sat them down and you had a real talk with them, you'd uncover that all of that anger and all of that hate is coming from some deep pain that they have inside of them that hasn't been addressed, that no one listens to and no one cares about. And it's coming out in this really horrible way. But they can see the light. I do believe they can change if that pain is addressed in a healthy way.
And I think this was a really important lesson for kids to be watching this episode, for them to understand. It was a great way to have kids understand why school is so important. It's not just to learn curriculum and to learn math and to, you know, learn things that they like feel like, oh, why am I learning this? Like, I'm not going to use this in the real world. When really, in reality, you absolutely are, to change the world for the better.
So we're back in the classroom. Feeney reveals that the same number of people passed the test as usual, and so it's a draw. So Corey gets to keep his bike. Corey's shocked that people still failed. Same boy. Feeney reassures him that it happens regardless of how good a teacher you are. Feeney tells Corey that Sean got a full grade higher, though, than usual, and that he never would have gotten Corey to read the book without this little experiment, which, you know, speaks to my whole point about giving kids a chance to teach, because then they learn the most. Corey admits, though, that he couldn't have fully understood the book without Feeney's help. So I guess there were like off-camera moments, like where Feeney actually helped Corey, you know, learn the book. And Corey's like, people just don't understand that about us teachers. Feeney says that's all right, Mr. Matthews. In time, one learns to live with a lack of respect, unruly students, minuscule pay. Rolade. And then we get the button, which is the cheerleading scene, which we already talked about. So that is it for the episode. So what was your fashion moment and what are your takeaways?
Fashion moment was probably Linda's outfit from the first scene that we see her in, with her like
her belt,
tight white long sleeve shirt and like the little vest. She was she like looked like Nancy Drew. I loved it.
She did. Oh my God, I thought of Nancy Drew too. And her hair was snatched.
My takeaways are that we are never done learning, and we are never done being humbled big time. Yep. And I think there's this recurring theme in life where people think like, I'm done with school, there's nothing else for me to learn, or I'm jaded in my career and I feel like I know everything and there's nothing else for me to learn. That is never true. Keep learning, keep staying curious. I
Yep.
think that's like the best thing you could do for yourself and for the world is to stay curious and to stay caring.
This confirmed for me how important it is to give students the chance to teach, to learn. Because those are the lessons that stay with them, I think, for longer than the ones that I feed them. That's it. All right. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard, rate and review us, please. 5 stars. Follow us on Instagram at Boy Meets World Podcast. The name of the wine we had?
Casillero del Diablo, a Merlot from Chile, 2021.
Theme song credit goes to Julia Rosa. Next week's episode is Class Pre-Union. Feeny gives an assignment to the class to predict where their life will be by their 20th class reunion. Thank you for listening. Cheers.